Welcome to Diagnosing Dx, the podcast giving diagnostics the platform it deserves. While therapeutics and devices often take centre stage, diagnostics is the engine driving precision medicine. I'm your host, David Philby, and each week we spotlight the innovators, breakthroughs, and real-world challenges shaping the future of DX. This week I'm joined by Dr. Sam Agus, a neurologist and diagnostics innovator with over 2 decades of experience across clinical trials, biomarker development, and early-stage ventures. Sam shares hard truths about why diagnostics struggle for funding, why prognostics are quietly becoming the next frontier, and how early partnerships, especially with pharma, are key to success. If you're building or backing in the DX space, this episode is a must listen. Welcome, Sam. Thank you for coming on the show this week. Super excited to chat to you. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me and for giving me the opportunity to talk a little bit about our, biomarkers and the future.
Yeah, 100%. I've been excited to speak to you because obviously you've got a huge amount of experience in the space, but it's not just overall experience. As a chief medical officer, as a chief scientific officer, involved in early stage companies, strategically funding everything that, if I could probably split these conversations into 4 and we could have, 4 different conversations. So, but it'd be great to start with an intro. It'd be from yourself, who are you, what have you been doing and what you're up to at the moment?
Sounds good, thank you. So I'm a neurologist by training. I have more than 20 years of experience in the design, the implementation, the interpretation of clinical trials, be it for regulatory purposes or for communications. And I've worked in the development of medications, medical devices, and diagnostics. Mostly in neuroscience, neurodegenerative diseases, but also in other age-related disorders and metabolic diseases. And I'm very passionate about this combination of development of new interventions and biomarkers, because I believe that, that will help us kind of develop something that is more rational, more precise. Folks like to use the word precise here, and really fit for purpose.
Awesome. And specifically in the biomarker arena and diagnostics arena, where have you been involved? And I think you're currently involved as well, right?
Yeah, so I'm a co-founder in a company that is developing a set of biomarkers for chronic kidney disease. And I'm also chief medical officer for a company that is developing biomarkers for Alzheimer's disease and other neurodegenerative disorders. And I've done some work also with a company that is developing PET ligands, also in the field of Alzheimer's disease. And I'm working with a company that is developing AI-based tools. It's more for patient management, but also for diagnostics.
Yeah, interesting. So you're heavily involved, especially at the early stage. I guess before we get into the challenges, is that where you find the most enjoyment or purpose, or why is it the sort of early stage and I guess pre-commercial companies, why is it you're sort of heavily focused on them at the moment?
Well, ideally it is to focus on them until we get to the point where the test is commercial. I believe in getting involved early, and in early I mean during the phases where there is a design concept. Unfortunately, medical affairs or medical considerations or even clinical considerations are coming in not as early as I think they should in clinical, in development of either interventions or diagnostics. But I believe, joining early as possible helps us to really understand the patient, the target patient, the needs, and really develop a product that can be more optimally fitting for the target population.
Yeah, awesome. So probably nobody better to speak to than yourself in terms of the current industry outlook and how things are going at the moment. What where would you say the industry is at the moment, and the sort of challenges that we're facing as an industry?
So I think the main problem is financing, of course. Developing of diagnostics, as almost as much as developing new drugs, is costly. And many stakeholders, especially the ones that are involved in financing, so VCs and banks, they view the whole topic of diagnostic as part of the intervention. So, oh, there is a new treatment for Alzheimer's disease. Let's see if we can develop a diagnostic that can help those companies that are selling drugs for Alzheimer's disease to use their drug better. The problem is that when you have an established drug, especially one that is already approved by the regulatory authority, the last thing that the developers would want, that the sponsors would want, is having another roadblock on the way to their drug, especially, once again, if we take the example of Alzheimer's disease, where the drugs is very expensive, the diagnostics are very complex already as it is. So adding another diagnostic, another procedure, is perceived as problematic. So the diagnostics that work in this environment are the ones that are perceived as potentially replacing expensive and difficult to reach diagnostics, and anything otherwise is kind of a little bit pushed to the side. It's not that developers and sponsors and VCs are not interested. They're just like, yeah, this is very interesting, but I'm not so sure that I'm going to be involved. So that is the main issue, and I think it comes from the point of we think of diagnostic as a tool that obviously helps us make a decision, but it seems that the trend is to think about it as a decision to do something, whereas a decision not to do something is almost as important. In fact, most people, when they are tested or evaluated in an environment of a chronic disease, do not need an intervention. What they need is some peace of mind. What they need is a test to tell them, okay, you know what, you're not at risk, or your risk level is very low, you're doing fine, just go on to whatever it is that you do. But obviously, most investors are not thinking about it in that way. And more importantly, they're always asking, well, what is it replacing? There's no money going in, there's no investment, there's no cost. But in fact, there is a cost. Every visit of a patient at a physician's office comes with a cost. Every test that they're doing, every procedure that they're doing comes with a cost. So if you have somebody who comes in with cognitive concerns, they would have an annual visit where they do a cognitive test, and then they may have another visit for cognitive assessment and planning, and the physical therapist or the speech therapist will give them a test. All of these things cost money, and on a huge population, that's a lot of money, that's a lot of spending, that's a lot of burden for those who are involved in that ecosystem.
So, without getting into conspiracy theories, right? Does diagnostics then suffer because therapeutics make a lot of money? Are we saying, are we saying there's an undertone of why invest in a diagnostic when you can invest in a therapeutic that makes 10 times as revenue?
Well, first of all, there are investors that focus on diagnostics.
Sure.
And secondly, it's, folks are trying to be realistic, and even folks with money, because nobody wants to put money where it doesn't make more money on the one hand. But these folks want to do something good. They want to invest in development of medications to help patients, because otherwise they would have invested in other industries. So it's not that there's a nefarious conspiracy going on behind the curtain that we're trying to face here.
Yeah.
It's just the reality of how folks see things. And there is a tendency, there may be two streams here. First of all, there's the tendency, like I said, to focus on the intervention, because that's the dramatic thing. That's the thing that changes. Finally, there's a treatment for Alzheimer's disease. Finally, we have a treatment that can really cause weight reduction. Things that really change the way that we treat people, and we've been talking about that for many years. So that's exciting. And then there's the other point, folks are using terms and trends, and they like to say, we need to treat early, we need to do this, we need to do that, disease modification, and the problem is that they don't really say the same thing. They don't agree on the terms that they're using. So as a result, you have on the one side you have a hype, on the other side you have a little bit of, I would say, uh, structural misunderstanding. And as a result, diagnostics are kind of pushed to the side because, once again, because they're not necessarily always driving to that hype. And it seems, things that happen in the background, they're a little bit less catchy, a little bit less sexy, so to speak. So it's, once again, it's not a conspiracy. It's not nefarious. It's just the way that things gain traction, the way that interest of people is being caught.
So even if you have a diagnostic that is super accurate and should have a really high impact on a population of candidates, you're still up against it actually being widely adopted, right? So
Yeah,
that's a challenge in itself, right? Just because it says it doesn't necessarily mean it will, right? In the wider free market.
yeah, and I mean there've been several attempts to make that kind of mainstay. I mean, first of all, there was the whole push for direct to consumer. So you have 23andMe and the likes of that, and they were very successful in the beginning because people indeed saw the point of using a diagnostic. But once again, the problem was that those diagnostics were sometimes too specific, like for instance, tests for colon cancer. And then somebody would say, well, do I need now to take a test for colon cancer, a test for prostate cancer, a test for this cancer, for that cancer? That means I'm going to be testing myself all day, and it's going to cost me a lot of money. And on the other hand, if you have a kind of a broader test like 23andMe, and it gives you a lot of answers, you may have a risk here and they have a risk there. And what do I do? So direct to consumer was not it was a huge success in the beginning, but it turned out to be a little bit more of a problem because it didn't lead to a decision. And I think that is the case that we need to understand most about diagnostics. Diagnostics need to lead to a decision. It doesn't have to be a do decision. It could be a not do decision, but it has to be leading to that decision. And more importantly, it has to be leading to a decision that I wouldn't have made otherwise. So, as an example, if I tell a person that has hypertension and diabetes, oh, you are at risk for chronic kidney disease, I haven't added anything to their knowledge, nor to their provider's knowledge, because they know that this is a risk. But if I can tell them, within the next 3 years, you might develop stage 3 chronic kidney disease, that's a different story.
Right.
So point one is, who do we target? Point two is the decision making. What decision is driven? And point three, it really has to be driven by the biomarker rather than by already knowledge that I have about the natural history of the disease. So something new that I didn't know without the diagnostic. So going back to the conundrum around implementation of diagnostics, obviously, when it is within the environment of a new treatment, it's the easiest because there is a new treatment. I've just developed a diagnostic that will lead to that treatment. So I have a clear environment where that would happen. So I think that it is very helpful for companies that are developing drugs and diagnostics to come together in the early stage in order to reach that. But like I said, there are a lot of decisions that are made that are not related to a drug. And more importantly, decisions of not to do something are also very important. So if I have a patient where I don't know what to do and I'm going to see the patient twice a year, but now I have a test that tells me that in the next 3 years, the risk for deterioration is very low, then maybe I won't need to see them twice a year, maybe once a year, maybe once every 2 years. And maybe I just need to follow up with the diagnostic. So it kind of makes the whole management of the patient more rational. It reduces that burden on the back end of before we reach the point that we may need a treatment. Just to give you an example about numbers, when you think about cognitive health, there's about probably 1.5 million people in the United States who will become treatment eligible with the new disease-modifying treatments like Leqembi or Kisunla. Okay, so 1.5 million people, that's a lot. But there are 40 million people in the US who are above the age of 65 and have cognitive concerns. So you can see that, while we have a very small now the 1.5 million becomes a small population compared to the large population, where what happens is a lot of churn. That means back and forth, going to the doctor with a problem. Doctor says, I can't see anything now. So you go home, you wake up tomorrow morning, oops, I forgot the keys away again. So should I now start to be worried? Or maybe the doctor is full of, what? So, and I need to go to another one. So, and that's the life of 40 million people. And that's a huge mass of people and a huge mass of decisions that are made around that.
So with things with precision medicine and companion diagnostics, right? The question is it your opinion that companion diagnostics are the future of diagnostics and where we're going to get the most value out of them because of their precision? Or are we already seeing that in a capital raising environment where actually companion diagnostics is already dominating, or we're seeing less capital raised because actually those companies are able to go agree a partnership with somebody on the therapeutic side that means they don't need to raise capital as much because they utilize the benefit of the partnership? Is that something that's already happening or going to happen in your experience? At Alevra Consulting, we focus on DX only, supporting early stage and growth companies achieve their milestones by solving their biggest talent challenges. Have you ever suffered from working with a talent partner who was either life sciences or med tech and dabbling in diagnostics? Or no more? Work with a diagnostics specialist talent partner.
So in cancer, companion diagnostics are quite the mainstay. And companies are really thinking about when they develop new drugs, really about the biomarkers that they're going to be using in order to identify the patients. With chronic diseases, it's more murky and more difficult. There is an idea that companion diagnostics could be the way forward. And companion diagnostics, they develop an additional IP around the product, an additional protection, and can improve better the access to the medication. But here's the crux. So a pharmaceutical company develops a drug. And by the time they reach phase two, they already have about maybe 10 years of development behind them and maybe $100 million of investment, even more. So now it's difficult to add another wild card, a companion diagnostic. So the point of entry for a companion diagnostic would be, in fact, when the company is doing preclinical studies.
Right.
Because that's when they can optimally, fit the two. And there's less risk. And in fact, they can use it as a de-risking process because if we trust the companion diagnostic, we see that it works, and then we move on to the next species and we see that actually now it doesn't work, it kind of opens the question, are we doing the right thing? Do we really have an intervention and so on? And then we can get into human studies, and even in phase 1, we can test those companion diagnostics, especially if they're target engagement biomarkers. And so on and so forth. So it's a good de-risking strategy. So and that is an important stream. So the development of companion diagnostics is an important stream moving forwards, especially in the treatment of chronic diseases, especially when we start to see an accumulation of potential treatments, and there is a need for differentiation. There is also a need for a whole class of diagnostics, which I call just, generally speaking, prognostic. And by prognostic, I mean diagnostics that will tell you that if a patient has a risk for a condition, what is the probability that they will deteriorate due to that condition.
Yeah.
So it's not only the fact that they will develop it, it's the fact that they will deteriorate, and a meaningful clinically meaningful deterioration, and the time frame that where it happens.
Right.
Because if one is ApoE homozygote, they're going to develop Alzheimer's disease, but they can still be developing it 25 years from now, right? So the time frame is critical because it really guides the decision. If I know that's going to happen within 25 years, I have other set of priorities. But if it's going to happen within the next 2 years, obviously this becomes a top priority, and I need to push in as much as possible. So you can see one gets the state of mind that they don't have to worry, and the other one gets the priority to the treatment. The difference between this kind of diagnostics and companion diagnostics is that those diagnostics can be developed without an intervention, whereas companion diagnostics must be developed together with the intervention. And by the time you get to phase 2, especially phase 3, there has to be an enough understanding of how they work together. So it's more about partnership early on with a pharmaceutical company.
How are then partnerships formed, Sam? So what comes first? Is the therapeutic developer looking for a companion diagnostic partner, or does a diagnostic in early stage diagnostic in research and development show that it might be suitable? And what comes first, and how are then partnerships usually formed?
So in the big collaborations, let's say, for instance, Eli Lilly acquiring Avid, okay? There is a growing understanding that we need to show that there is amyloid in the brain so that we can identify the patients that can actually respond to amyloid removal treatment. It makes sense, right? And then I buy a PET company, and they are able to show me, or their ligands are able to show me that indeed the patient has amyloid. We have a good partnership together.
Right.
So that's one way of that happening. Indeed, today I would recommend that early stage development in diagnostics, that developers, that sponsors would seek out potential partners in the pharmaceutical industry. The problem is that it's not so easy to get there.
Okay.
And so if somebody is developing a diagnostic with the intention that it will become a companion diagnostic, they really need to have good connections and good networks so that they can speak with the developers early on, be it by themselves or through their investors or through the ecosystem where they're operating. If they don't have those links, or if the links are not that strong, then perhaps companion diagnostic is not the best way to go. Now, the problem is that if you have a diagnostic that is very, very specific, let's say you're targeting a specific enzyme for treatment, and then you have a method to show that that enzyme works or doesn't work, so you can test whether an inhibitor is really working or vice versa. That is clearly, it's a target engagement biomarker, and it's clearly something that should develop in the route of companion. So the best way is probably to go around in the conferences and shop for developers in the early stage, do those searches, and try to partner with somebody who knows somebody. Network is the key here. For those companies that are developing other types of diagnostics, there are other challenges, but they can already start without having a partner in the beginning.
And this is a way for the diagnostics industry to benefit from a better success and hit rate, rather than, because what we're seeing right now in the current landscape is unfortunately so many diagnostics companies that are previously funded, and now that funding is drying up, and we are seeing monthly stories of bankruptcies and layoffs and so forth, right? So if companion diagnostics is an early outlet through partnerships that allow for not only a better success rate of early stage company, but also a more precision future in terms of what diagnostics and how therapeutics are used or not used.
Right. I mean, of course, because those two tracks of development are not happening together. Each
Yeah.
track is kind of siloed by itself. Now, by the way, there is perhaps a path forward to try to trickle into the drug development environment if diagnostic companies embed themselves into CROs, preclinical CROs, and those preclinical CROs are the ones that are knowledgeable about those diagnostics. They use it as part of the tests that they're doing in the animal studies. So that could become and that could become an environment like a matchmaking environment. Oh, by the way, I have this company. They're starting this model. You're doing this. Why don't we do it together? And then preclinical CROs can also benefit, from that kind of model. But right now, there is no place where those two streams work together, unless there is an acute need, and suddenly somebody is looking on the drug development side, is looking around and needs a biomarker, and then they will find it, and then they may even acquire the biomarker development company. So I think what we need is those, nowadays they call them perhaps venture studios. So,
Yeah.
it's an environment where you have a lot of small companies working together.
Yeah.
And sometimes if one of the companies is failing, the technology remains within the studio so that it can be used for other purposes as well. So there is a lot of benefit in those kinds of environments. So CROs, preclinical CROs, or CROs that do early clinical development may still be able to make that matchmaking, and venture studios, and perhaps non-competitive environments. Medical diseases pathway that was run by NIH could be one. Nowadays, obviously, there may be a little bit less funding in that environment, but uh, all of those pre-competitive environments could also be considered consortiums. They should be interested. So Alzheimer's Association or any other. Michael J. Fox Foundation is very much involved in both. ADDF is a good fostering environment, with the Bill Gates Foundation. So there are places where that can happen. Not enough. Uh, so perhaps we need more. And like I said, there are opportunities for developing more.
Yeah. Interesting. Do you see because you mentioned this about the 23andMe thing and the direct consumer model, but we've also seen the success of the Exact Sciences Cologuard test, a direct consumer model that's had, I mean, I think they just said they've just hit the 20 millionth test. That you mentioned it earlier, that's obviously a real positive, right, in the industry, especially around a type of test for early colon cancer that has a lack of education and a stigma attached that people won't get tested for. And there's many other types of cancer that would probably fall into that bracket. I think of like prostate cancer as one. But also to your point, and it's a really interesting point, people can't be taking a test every 6 months for 20 different things, right? So where's the balance between, or where's the future going in terms of, you got Cologuard, hyper specific, very successful, and you've got 23andMe, which really, people did and thought it was a bit of fun in the end almost, and then didn't really do anything about it, just showed their friends that they were supposed to be a good athlete or something, but genetically, never did. But where's the future of that? Where's the middle ground, do you think, for, how does it become still precise, but with in reality that people are going to be able to utilize it as it needs to be utilized?
So, I mean, it's the same question about drugs, right? If you have a good drug for diabetes,
Hmm.
that's nice. But if you have also hypertension, maybe a little bit of heart failure as a result, maybe some chronic kidney disease, maybe some cognitive decline, and you can see how those medications start to stack one on top of the other, and then you reach an age where you basically have a box where the one slot for the morning already is a pharmacy by itself. So it's not an easy fix. I think that what we need is, besides the diagnostics, what we need is an environment or a framework where we can prioritize and say, for this one, we give this diagnostic, for that one, we use that one, and how to interpret the diagnostics. Because it's not only enough to show that the diagnostic has a good performance, by the way.
Mm.
The diagnostic may have a good performance in specialty care, but once it goes to primary care, where you have more negative cases than positive cases, it changes the performance. So, so we need some sort of a framework, maybe quality metrics, that will allow us to say, for this type of person at this type of time or this point of time, that is the set of tests that they need to take, and this is how to interpret it. I don't think we're there yet because we don't have that many tests, but there is an evolution of biomarkers for cancer. So basically, we are starting to be in a situation where, a man would probably need to take 2 or 3 tests already: the colon, prostate, and perhaps to do a skin test for melanoma. And a woman would have to do the same with breast and ovary and so. So there is no good answer here, but perhaps a framework where we bring together the stakeholders in this ecosystem could help in kind of prioritizing which test you should do first, which test you should do second, and how many, what is the frequency for the tests, and what to expect from those tests when you get a positive result or a negative result. So, yeah, a little bit of an answer that kind of puts it in front of a lot of people, so to speak. But perhaps that's the way forward.
So that back to your earlier point on prognostics, it doesn't it put more emphasis on prognostics as such a valuable tool, so that, not like you say, if I'm a 50-year-old male, I fall into many different buckets of, you should be getting tested for this, and this, right? And to be, like you say, I don't want to be bombarded with tens of tests every year just to stay on top of what might be happening. Less is more, and I'd want it's just not feasible, is it? Or it's just not realistic that people would actually do that. So then that puts more emphasis on prognostics being able to guide different populations of people to go, no, you don't need to test for that. You're going to be fine. And does that mean prognostics is a big market opportunity, a hot opportunity? Are investors, seeing prognostics as something that's, going to be, used more widely and adopted, quicker than say precision diagnostics?
So they should, obviously. I don't think they're there yet. I will add to what you're saying is that everybody believes that with chronic diseases, the best way to treat is early as possible.
Hmm.
But then the question is, what is early, right? I mean, okay, when there are symptoms, usually that means that the disease is already quite advanced. Once again, for instance, with chronic kidney disease, when you have a reduction of eGFR to below 60, that means that about 50% of the kidney is already not functioning, and most of that will never come back to function. Oh, we can still live with half a kidney. That's fine. But you realize that we're using the reservoir that we have. So early becomes when the pathology starts, not before, not when the symptoms start. But then the question is, well, are we going to treat everybody that has any sign of pathology
Right.
to prevent this untoward development? And the answer is no, because first of all, once again, what are the risk factors for chronic kidney disease? Hypertension, diabetes. Well, first of all, we're treating hypertension and diabetes. also because of the kidney, but also because of other organs. So why is the kidney most important here? To be discussed. I'm not saying yes, I'm not saying no. I think the crux of a good prognostic biomarker is, once again, it's able to identify a clinically meaningful deterioration and give the time frame for that. Now, the question is, should we be looking for a clinically meaningful deterioration due to a specific organ, i.e. kidney, or should we be looking for clinically important or clinically significant deterioration in the general healthcare, or maybe in, signs of frailty, for instance, because that is also a result of chronic diseases. So it is, I believe, prime time for that, for prognostics. It's just that it's also, there's a high need to be able to make the right definitions around prognostics. And that's when investors, when they will understand, when they will be on the same page in terms of those terms and the understanding of those terms, then it will be easier for them to start to intervene as well and be involved. So I think it's kind of, I wouldn't say chicken and egg, but both things have to evolve at the same time. So we need to see more companies that want to develop prognostics under these guiding principles. And then we will see more investors who would want to come in as soon as they start to see the first success case. But yes, the short answer is prognostic is the future.
What are the diagnostics companies that you're involved in at the moment? What are they developing? What do you have in development at the moment? What are you working on?
So, like I said, I'm a co-founder in a company that is developing biomarkers for chronic kidney disease. And the idea is that we want to be able to identify the risk of individuals who are at risk to develop chronic kidney disease, to deteriorate due to chronic kidney disease before the current biomarkers are showing any sign. So, for instance, like I said, EGFR comes in a little bit later on. It's still early when the EGFR starts to go down, but it is already an indication that half of the kidney is gone already. Protein in the urine is about the same story. So so if you look at the individuals who already have some reduction in the EGFR, already have a little bit of protein in the urine, they would make up maybe 10, 20% of the total population at risk. So that means that 80% do not know that they have started to go down, but they're concerned because they should be going down that route because they know that it's a risk for them. So what we have is a set of biomarkers that can be identified in urine even before the onset of decrease in EGFR and proteinuria. And we can use a combination of those three biomarkers, and we're building them as a prognostic measure so that you can identify who is at a higher risk to deteriorate. And by deterioration, we look at certain kinds of definitions. So it's not only kidney function. We're looking also at biomarkers or the onset of biomarkers for congestive heart failure, for instance, which is a very common further down the line deterioration in individuals with metabolic syndrome and chronic kidney disease. And also at function, like for instance, 6-minute walk test or grip strength, which are also markers of general health and robustness. So that's one thing that we're doing. And I'm also working with a company that is developing a plasma test, which and this test is going to be used in individuals who are concerned about their cognitive health. And we have a biomarker which is specific to Alzheimer's disease. It's a specific form of the unfolded p53. So p53 is a very known protein. There are specific post-translational modifications for the development that happen around the development or early stage of development of Alzheimer's disease. And this biomarker can tell us if an individual is cognitively unimpaired, will experience a clinical deterioration, and gives us a time frame more than 6 years from now, 2 to 6 years, and up to 2 years. So you could say fast, slow, and no deterioration. So both biomarkers are kind of, in my mindset, work in the same space. So individuals that you think could develop a disease, but you don't know. As a result, they churn. They go back and forth. Now, some would say with diabetes, maybe we now have anti-SGLT2, which is kind of standard of care. It should protect the kidney. In hypertension, the questions, still remains. So I don't want to go too deep into the use cases, but all I'm trying to say is these individuals, they're in the system, they're being tested, they're being evaluated. Currently, we don't have anything good to tell them what is the future holding for them. And more importantly, I hope that this would also guide eventually treatment decisions, because if somebody has a pathology but does not have the likelihood to develop clinical symptoms, and so maybe a philosophical question, but it is a question, should they be even treated? And we can have a whole discussion about that. But it's opening an alley, a way forward for folks who believe that patients should be treated in this way, at least to understand what to expect.
And are both them companies you're involved in, are they preclinical?
So one of those companies we were already, so with the Alzheimer biomarker, we have already done initial validation of the biomarker on a large sample from a stored sample data set. With the kidney biomarkers, we have initial data from children, both with genetic diseases. So these children have like Alport syndrome, and so they're known to, or polycystic kidney disease, and they're known to have a risk to develop. The biomarker is increased before they started to have a deterioration in their kidney function. And we're now in this stage of trying to validate it in a larger data set in adults. So we have a collaboration with a hospital in Lausanne, and they have a large data set that we're going to be using, and also to do some animal studies as well, just to understand, the evolution of the biomarker, the link between the biomarker and the kidney pathology, especially in the early stages, something that we can't do obviously with humans. So you could say that with the Alzheimer biomarker, we're at stage 2 or phase 2. With the kidney biomarkers, I would say we're somewhere between preclinical and first in human studies.
And have them companies had to raise capital recently, or are you in fundraising mode? I guess this sort of leads into, investor conversations right now. What are investors looking for in the prognostics and diagnostics field?
Yeah, so both companies, like every small company, are financing all the time.
Yeah.
Every day is a day for financing in early stage biotech. One of the companies is already has some investors that have been involved, and so the company is called Diadem. It's already funded by certain VCs and investment organizations. The other company is still kind of at their seed phase, I would say, and we're seeking perhaps, I would say, a seed or Series A funding for that one. But yeah, both are, as always, looking for investment.
And are you getting good feedback from investors that that there's capital to access, or because obviously it's tough out there. I mean, objectively, people know that it's not an easy time to be raising capital, regardless of industry, almost.
Let's be very honest, it's always tough. Although it seems to be a little bit tougher now,
Yeah.
but it's always tough. I mean, and it should be that way. I mean, you have people who handle money, a lot of money, and they want to make sure that the money goes in the right place. Like I said, they're interested in investing in healthcare, in innovation, because otherwise they would have invested someplace else. And
Right.
so, the will is there. It's just that they don't have an endless amount of money. they want to be sure that they're putting it in the right place. So we have discussions, obviously. We have those meetings. It's not an easy thing. It's not a slam dunk for anybody. Sometimes you have early stage companies that are well connected already. Maybe they come with somebody who has been already successful, have done a successful exit. That always helps.
Yeah.
It's tough, but we have those discussions. We have good discussions. Obviously, we're open to discuss with more, but it's not that we don't have anybody that listens to us. And as you said, it is tough, especially nowadays. There's a certain degree of uncertainty, which actually I think is good because it means that investors are going to be more careful with the way that they're putting their money and other people's money, because it's not always their money. So it's a dialogue. It's a tough dialogue.
Do you think the cautiousness that we're seeing gets easier in the near future, in the sort of next 12 months, or is it, because what I do feel is that there's a lot of things that are happening on a macro scale that people don't really know what's happening next, right? So there's things things like interest rates in the US, which we should see ease, in the next 12 months. I think, with inflation numbers looking better and better, the EU have already dropped interest rates, I think 8 times in the last 2 or 3 years since its peak. US, the Fed is a little bit slower to act, but we should see an ease in interest rates in the US over the next 12 months. But is there optimism in the US about access to capital in the next 12 months, and how, I'm not saying that suddenly it becomes like it did in the post-COVID world, where there's so much money raised, just frivolously. But do you feel that over the next 12 months it does get a bit better?
So I'll be a little bit controversial. I don't
Okay.
want this to become better, so to speak. What I want it to be more targeted. Now, of course, I believe that the technologies I represent are the best technologies in the world. But I understand that everybody that comes into that, they believe that they have the best technology in the world. And I want the investors to continue to be very diligent in making a decision where they're going to put the money. Because if it's just frivolously thrown around, and that means that, first of all, there's just going to be a waste of money, and secondly, it doesn't foster innovation in a good way. What hard times teach us is to be very thoughtful about what it is that we're doing, and making sure that we do it in the right way. It kind of behooves us to be more prudent and more diligent with ourselves. So, but to your question, is it going to be more, is there going to be some, let's say, more generosity, so to speak? Perhaps. And perhaps with this increased diligence, that improved environment will work better for all the stakeholders that are involved. But once again, it's not a matter of, first of all, there is a lot of money going around. Maybe not as much as it was during the post-COVID surge. We can see the numbers are going down to around 2019 right now, but it is a lot of money. I think we should all be hopeful that that money is spent in a good way.
And then you have AI.
Oh, that one.
I don't know if we should talk about this, Sam, but it seems to be the one thing that is completely going against the trend right now, where it feels like, and this is a sweeping statement. I can't put fact on this, but it does feel like there is less due diligence and more generosity in AI investment right now in the market, and that can only mean at some point that has to normalize, and the future that, I don't know if you share that opinion, or if you differ on that.
I think that so like I said, I'm working with a company that is developing patient management tools based on AI.
Yeah.
And we think that there may be room for AI also with our set of biomarkers for the chronic kidney disease, because it's 3 biomarkers. So there are many ways by which you can combine them together. I mean,
Right.
formula, but AI perhaps would be a better way forward.
Yeah.
So I cannot say that we have it easier because we work with AI. It piques some interest, yes,
Sure.
but it doesn't put money in the bank by itself. They want to see, the investors still want to see that it works. So, but I do take your point, because there is a lot of hype in the media about investment in AI companies and talk about AI, and there have been a few successes that became very, very kind of top of mind, and we all use an AI, or in our daily work now. So that is also kind of, it drives the feeling as if AI is everything. And like with everything else, after the hype, there is a slump. So, and nowadays these happen much faster. So I
Yes,
believe that before the end of next year, we'll already be in a slump for AI
I
as
agree.
well. And at the end of okay, there's one thing that we always need to remember. There are investors that are more versed in AI and healthcare management tools.
Yes.
And there are investors who are more into biotech and the biotech side of diagnostics. They're not always the same
Yeah.
investors.
Yeah.
So sometimes when you say AI, but your investor is more kind of a wet biotech, so to speak, they're going to be, yeah, okay, you know what? I don't understand. That's not my, maybe you want to go down the road. There's another one that is better for you, and vice versa. So perhaps there is a need for investors also to create some sort of more portfolio environment where they're looking at several ways to, several potential solutions and
Mm.
technologies coming together, because they are coming together. Um, so perhaps that is also something that is going to happen. Because right now, I think that it's very difficult just to understand, where an investor is more knowledgeable and where is their sweet spot,
Right. Right.
especially in this diagnostic patient management environment.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It's interesting that you've got sort of exposure to both sides. That actually, in a software side, tool-based workflow side, that actually it's not a lack of due diligence. There's still due diligence, which is good to know. And I agree with you. I don't know the time frame, but there has to be a few failures. And at some point these companies are supposed to make money, and profit. And that's, I think, the unknown. We're just too early on that so much of the investment going into AI companies at the moment and over the last couple of years, at some point them companies become profitable in theory, and which ones aren't, and which new AI companies are about to come and do what they're trying to do, but quicker and better. So we just feel still very early on it all. But if anybody has ever tracked any specific market, it is just following the same trend as any market. That's the hype.
Yeah,
We all believe it's going to be great, and it's going to improve so many things and efficiency, and it's going to revolutionize so many different industries and individual, outputs. But we are just in the early stage of a booming market, and that has to normalize at some point. So,
yeah.
yeah.
Well, if there's one thing that we can forecast, is that these changes are going to happen faster.
Yes.
So, in fact, I would say that maybe it's time to even understand what is going to be the next hype
Mm.
after AI, and prepare for that. But once again, I think that we need a collaborative environment, either be it in a pre-competitive space or at least a degree of partnership. Um, we have those who are involved have to understand they're all stakeholders in a patient ecosystem.
Right.
And if we want to be in that ecosystem, which is our ecosystem, because we are potentially patients as well as individuals, that means that we need to find ways to collaborate and to build partnerships early on. And that means that, some folks have to pull up their sleeves and take a little bit more of a stand. For instance, CROs. I want to see CROs more involved in strategic decisions around development, not only as service provider, but really as those who can perhaps shape the trend by themselves. I want to see preclinical CROs become an environment where biomarkers can thrive and then be used by early stage development companies. And the same thing for clinical CROs, whereby they can, and many of them are going that way. They have AI departments, they have diagnostic departments. So they are evolving in that way. I just want to see more of it.
Yeah. Well, Sam, your perspective on everything to the wider market, the opportunities for early stage companies and the future of diagnostics, plus the funding landscape, which is obviously always that's a hot topic in itself, is fantastic. And I really appreciate you taking the time to come on and share it. Super insightful. Thank you very much for coming on this week.
Thank you, David, and talk to you again in the future.
Thanks, Sam.
Have a good one. Take care.